What is going on, guys and girls? It's GhostRobo, and we are here to talk all about The Last of Us. Yes, that epic, amazing, incredible, wondrous gem of a game that sadly has just wrapped up on my channel. But fear not, I plan on keeping the spirit of the game and the world alive via this review, thoughts, and analysis video, as well as some multiplayer that I'll be checking out real soon. Right now, though, let's dive straight into what makes The Last of Us such a generation-defining experience, possibly one of the greatest games of all time. And I think a lot of people are currently lauding it for its story. I hear like it's a cinematic game that has this amazing story that wraps you up. And while I do feel like the plot is pretty engaging and cool, it's a little bit generic and kind of hits on a lot of the story beats that you'd expect from a zombie and or apocalypse game. And instead, what I feel separates The Last of Us from all the other action titles, all the other third-person shooters, and pretty much most other game, no matter what genre it falls into, is the following. And we'll start off with its ability to convey tone, feeling, and emotion through mechanics. So the gameplay in The Last of Us is in my opinion, practically perfect. I always felt like I was fully in control of Joel and Ellie and their arsenal. I could do whatever I wanted. At a moment's notice, I never had a complaint about the controls or clunkiness or feeling like I was hampered by something that I shouldn't be hampered by. And instead, what they do so beautifully is take all of the feeling, all of the emotion in this world and really bring it straight to your hands, straight to the player, straight to that controller. So when I see Ellie being grabbed by a clicker and I run up and I viciously smash it in the head with a crowbar or a broken board or a rusty pipe, Joel is angry, he's pissed off, he's ferocious, he's adrenalined up, and he takes down that clicker. And I'm feeling the same way, like, man, I need to smash this guy to pieces so I can save this girl. And the same can be said for the slow moments. When you're stealthily sneaking around these environments, you're crawling through backyards, you're avoiding enemy eyes in a snowy town. It's all about real dread. I really feel like they convey that a lot. Like, you have to make sure that every moment you are on your toes. You can't let anybody see you. You can't let these infected get too close to your caravan, you and Ellie, or you and Ellie and Tess, or Henry and Sam, or whoever's with you at that moment. Like, you gotta be careful. And so I'm just ever so slightly pressing that stick forward so I can get closer to the clicker. Or I'm ever so slightly crafting something, gently depressing the X button as I move to, create another shiv or get another Molotov in order to take these guys down. And there's so much, like, just straight up emotion in your actions. Joel is a very aggressive character that does what he has to do to take these guys down. And even when you play Ellie, this much more innocent and fragile character, like, she jumps on the back of those clickers, she's stabbing it to death to try to survive. And there's even cinematic moments that can convey sort of a similar feel. When Ellie is stabbing David in the face, it's like she is just burnt out. It's all getting to her. The emotion is just swelling, and you feel the same way. Like, just F this guy. He tried to kill us. He tried to do whatever he was going to do and eat our girl, eat our Ellie, and now we're going to mess up his face, not because we're an evil person, but just because it's too much. There's too much stress and struggle going on. And there's plenty of moments, both early and late, where I really feel like what you are doing, maybe it's a time restriction thing. A lot of times you're fighting off infected and trying to deal with the current set of enemies before more get there. And so you're blasting guys with the shotgun and you're throwing smoke bombs to give yourself a little more time. And I really felt like they just conveyed that survival instinct so well through the controls, specifically through the mechanics of what you're doing. How many times in that series did I sneak behind a door so I could craft something? That doesn't happen in many games. I'm playing through Deadpool right now. I played through games like Borderlands, Gears of War. You open up those menus wherever you are at any moment, any time, because it doesn't really matter. It's like, you're doing your thing and there's the story, and they're not really integrated. Here, though, every action that I did, I felt like I was playing such an important part in my survival, such an important part in the lives of Joel and Ellie. So I'd hide behind doors to craft. I would slowly slink through houses just in case someone was there. And so it basically conveys everything that the characters are feeling to you through the controls. One, because they're perfect. Two, because the stealth moments and the aggressive moments really correlate with the emotions and actions on screen, and then bring them straight to your heart. And I feel like that's one of the greatest reasons it builds such a strong bond between you, the player, and Ellie and Joel, which is the next thing that the game does so well, is it really just nails that relationship. I was watching my brother play through the early hours of the game, and dang, Joel is such a different character, and he treats Ellie so different in those opening bits. And by the time you get to the snow, by the time you get to that second spring, it's like they are bonded as father and daughter, even though they're not, blood related, by their hearts and by what they've been through. And it's really cool if you have a chance to go back and watch those opening bits and see, man, this is the guy that started the game, and where did he get to? And I feel like it's not like, oh, he's a powered up version of himself, although you do have upgrades. I feel like they grow on each other, Ellie and Joel, and he learns how to be a person that can still be a survival hardened man and also have a heart that allows him to take care of Ellie, and also her progress, of her being sort of this really like spunky and tough kid, and then going through these ebbs and flows of, man, just had enough, and she won't even talk to you. There's a moment late in the game when you first get to Salt Lake City where you go and conduct this typical action of boosting her up, and she doesn't come over. And I think that that's such a beautiful example of, like, most games you don't think about that, right? You just press triangle where you see triangle and it's like no big deal, but she doesn't come. And we're so trained to just hit prompt on screen, expect action, and it breaks that cycle, and you realize, wow, like, they've been through a lot, and it really makes them seem like real characters that you can relate to and that you can have extreme feeling for when something happens to them. So when Ellie gets kidnapped towards the end of the game, you're like, I am going to murder the man that took her. And I think that had they not established this bond, this growing bond, you wouldn't feel that way. And they time it all out perfectly. The way that Joel and Ellie interact is really just, I don't know another word besides perfect. They grow on each other over time in a very realistic fashion. And just seeing that beginning of game to end game growth of the characters is really remarkable. And I think when a lot of people mention story, they're talking more about that, about the connection between Ellie and Joel, and how you kind of grow to learn so much about them via simple things, right? It's the simple offhanded remarks that Ellie makes. It's the way that Joel looks at her when she gives him the picture at the end of the game, and just some of these moments that I don't know if it's their motion capture technology or just their understanding of how to tell a story, or maybe just their, like, honest to God humanistic appreciation for feeling an emotion and love and care and anger and sadness and hatred and all that they really get it. Whoever they have on their team, like, just, they really get it. And the other part of the game that can't be forgotten is just the majestic nature of just about everything. I really talked a lot during the series about how I appreciated the groundedness of the environments, how there's no alien spaceships, there's no gigantic citadel, there's no humongous arena for battle where the infected are waiting in your midst. It's all places that you and I see every day. It's schools, it's hospitals, it's, ski lodges and college campuses, it's backyards and trucks and trailers and a lot of stuff that I just felt really grounded the game in this way that hardly any video games are willing to do. Every game wants to give you the set piece, like, boom, look at what we built, look at what we have to show off to you. And those are great. There's some epic moments in games like Halo and Mass Effect and even BioShock Infinite, which is drawing, strong comparisons to this just in terms of its Game of the Year status. But here, think about the set pieces. Maybe it was a radio tower, maybe it was a Capitol building, and they were very well modeled, but for the most part, the actual environments themselves were not the highlight. It was how you were approaching them, how you experience them. And that's where I think the game shines its strongest, is when they give you sort of a big map, they make the invisible walls pretty much non-existent and let you just handle it how you want to handle it. One of my favorite moments of the game is when you're with Bill and you're in this series of backyards and there's no real funneled path. Obviously you have to get to a specific location, but you can kind of peruse the houses if you want. You can kind of skip some backyards if you want. You can take down the infected. You can not take down the infected. And it's just gorgeous. It looks like we're creeping through this backyard, and it brings everything together, right? It adds all that emotion and tone through the gameplay of, I'm creeping through these backyards. Well, who's inside the houses? Are there dead people, alive people? What's been going on in this place? Oh my God, what if this happened to my neighborhood? It really highlights all the gameplay success of, I can take dudes down with stealth. I can go crazy bananas and throw some bombs and shoot them all in the head with a hunting rifle. And it looks gorgeous. The game stands out visually as, I think, the best looking game of all time. And even though I was just at E3 seeing a lot of PlayStation 4 games, a lot of Xbox One games, the next generation of graphical fidelity and power, man, this one looks good. And it makes me so excited for, like, what motion capture, faces and just all that can look in the future, because we've come so far from the beginning of this generation. If you look at the early titles, Perfect Dark Zero, and even Uncharted 1, how much significantly improved The Last of Us is, it's just dang incredible. And there's so many beautiful scenes. They do so much greatness with those skyboxes, setting suns, rising suns, darkening skies, snowstorms. They really utilize a full repertoire of weather and time to create a lot of beautiful scenes and mix it up. I feel like it's a game that, again, even though it doesn't have its, level on a different planet, it doesn't have its underwater, Magic Kingdom level, it doesn't have its, gigantic fort where you're taking down 1 trillion guys, it makes you feel like there's so many special moments. And I kind of want to step into my favorite moments of the game, some of my favorite and least favorite moments. We'll start with the good. One of the ones is that scene section with Bill and Joel and Ellie when you're creeping through the backyards. I really adored that. Another is definitely the snowstorm. When you're with Ellie, you first, just that moment when you control her is incredible. I did not see it coming. I think it's a brilliant choice. They timed it just right. And then that whole snowy scene when you're a weakened character and you're trying to survive, there's just so much. It's just like I constantly felt myself sighing and like, okay, we got to just breathe through this. We got to get through. It's really freezing. She's about to die. These creepy cannibals are after me. And again, it's just a beautiful example of bringing everything together. And specifically on that character switch, a lot of games could be sort of, oh, you just did that to make a statement, or you just did that because it was cool, or character switches are one of my favorite things, to be honest. But it can come off as a little bit trite if not done correctly. And here it's like the most perfect one. Joel gets injured, and like, what are you going to do? Skip 3 months and let him heal and take up his mantle again? Or no, you're going to be Ellie and try to help him survive. And again, just what I was talking about at the top of this video, it's conveying emotion and care through gameplay. So I have to go out and get food for Joel because he's hurting in the storyline, making my actions seem that much more important, that much more crucial to the success of these characters, even though there's zero choice in the game. I think that's another really interesting thing it does is it places no moments of choice in terms of you can't decide how you're going to take care of Ellie. You can't decide if you're going to just give up on the journey. You can't decide what the ending is going to be, but it really feels like I am in this game and I'm not being guided. And I think it does that via storytelling, like I said, through environment, storytelling through mechanic, and just subtly building this bond between Joel and Ellie that you feel like as I'm getting to know these characters, they're getting to know themselves and each other as well. So when all is said and done, it feels like not only the journey of Joel and Ellie, but my journey as well. And so even though there is zero player input in terms of what happens with that plot line, I feel like I played a significant role in everything from carrying her across, these little rivers. She's a young girl. She's fragile. We go across rivers and she can't even make it swim across. And that's like a big moment for me also that I really enjoyed, was just having to transport her around, whether it was carrying her at the end of the game, whether it was pushing her on that raft. It gives you a sense of responsibility. It makes me feel like, hey, I want to take care of Ellie. And so any of those moments were really, I thought, quite cool. I'm trying to think of other favorite scenes in the game that really stand out. Again, Bill's backyard, the winter snowstorm are, I think, two of the greatest. And there's also just that first instance with the clickers in the subway. Holy crap, that's one of the most intense gameplay things I've ever experienced, where you don't really know them that well yet. You don't know the enemies, so you don't realize, oh, I can creep up on them pretty handily. Instead, I'm like terrified of them. What am I going to do? If you go back and watch that sequence, it took me like 15 minutes just to get through this tiny little area with a couple clickers and 2 or 3 infected because I was so afraid of them. And that's another thing it does well. It builds up your confidence with your weaponry and with the enemies throughout the game. And I felt like they handled crafting and sort of weapon management in a really good way. The collectibles are all pretty grounded. You're picking up pendants of fireflies. You're reading a lot of awesome notes that contribute to the story or add extra bits and tidbits of side adventures that kind of are cool. The story of Ish was one of my favorite moments as well, as we entered the sewers and you see this scene and you can just tell that stuff went down there, and via the notes you really learn a lot about the place, and it gives you a better context for what you're going through instead of the sewer level or the underground level or the snow level or the whatever level. You have like, hey, this is why it's all taking place. I never felt like I was in a location for a random reason, or like, oh, we're just going through here because it looks cool or because it gives us a chance to show off, a lot of giant buildings. There was always a really grounded and character-driven, story-driven reason to be wherever we are. The end scene is also a great one because I think it just brings it all together in terms of that relationship between Joel and Ellie, what they've been through, and how dang much he loves her and how dang much she trusts him. And I wanted to bring up something about that specific end scene, because I think a lot of people are having misunderstandings about the end of the game and Joel's lie to Ellie. It seems to be the general consensus that there was a recorder that said there were past patients that they had experimented on, past immune people, and so there was no guarantee that Ellie's would have been a success. And I feel like this misunderstanding does disservice to the emotional impact of the ending of the game, because that's not the case. That's not true or correct. There is a recorder that talks about past cases, but let me read you word for word what it says. Her infection is nothing like I've ever seen. As we've seen in all past cases, the antigenic blah, 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 blah. Her infection is nothing like I've ever seen. As we've seen in all past cases. They never mention past immunities. They never mention past people they've experienced on. She is a unique case. When he says past cases and the antigenic is, he says cordyceps remain high in the serum and cerebrospinal fluid. He's talking about past infected that they have looked at, past people who have this virus. He never says past people that had her immunity, her specific strain. He just says past cases. He's referring to people they've seen with the virus and the fact that they also have high levels of the cordyceps stuff and all the bacteria and toxins and blah, 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 and goes on to give some more medical dialoguing about the specifics of said virus. But it does not really at all indicate in any way that they had past people that they, removed their brains and oops, it didn't work. All it indicates is that they have been studying the virus and there are plenty of similarities, but hers doesn't kill her, and that's the difference. And so I just want to clear that up for people because it really, I think, again, does a disservice to what Joel says, even though he's a fictional character, if you believe that there were other people and it might not have worked. Joel is specifically lying to her in order to save her. And whether Ellie knows that he's lying or not, I don't know. That look on her face at the end is either one of sincere trust or because of the little quiver, maybe she knows he's lying but loves him even more for that. And it's an emotional decision. That's a lot of people seem to be on the side like they should have saved humanity, but let's think about this story. The Fireflies were never portrayed as really good people. They were never portrayed as heroes or valiant savers of the populace. They were portrayed kind of as smugglers, bandits, militia. They didn't go around saving the day. There was no grand Firefly, hotline you could call up and get a dude to come out and help you through, the apocalypse. It was a group of people that were banding together against the military, against the hunters and stuff, but there's no indication of what they would have done with a vaccine had they been able to procure one from Ellie. One, we don't know if it would have worked. Two, most likely in this very factionated, is that even a word? Factionated? Very, very many factions and hostile world. They would have either used it to their advantage, saved their people, and then threatened others. Who knows? It's such a difficult process to even spread that. Had they been good people, I don't think they would have. I don't know how they would have. Everybody come here. Then they're going to draw evil people, good people, infected. Everyone's so spread out. It's not like they have cell phones that work. It's not like they have a gigantic communication system that spreads the United States. So maybe it would have saved the Fireflies, and then who knows what they would have done with it. Go about their business, become an evil overlord, save the world. Nobody knows, but it would have been a lot more difficult than people are wanting to believe. It wasn't like, yes, we got the vaccine, and now humanity is just lined up outside this hospital. For the most part, no one knew where they were. If you remember, people kind of were aware that they were at that university in Colorado, but then it was only via a recording in that one head scientist's office that we figured out they had transported everything to Utah. And so who knows how difficult it would have been to really save the people. So I think that while it was slightly a selfish decision by Joel, I think that it has a lot more, it's a lot more believable and a lot more okay in my eyes, because I realize the difficulties and problems that would have arisen even had there been a vaccine. And dang it, you can't sacrifice innocent lives just to save everyone else. I mean, I think about it as your kid, your brother, your mom. Oh, we're going to kill them in efforts to possibly save other people. I know that makes sense on a societal level, but on an individual level, there's no way Joel was ever going to let that happen. And while that is one of the more beautiful moments of the game, him carrying her out of the building, the preceding section is probably one of my least favorite parts. And so we'll touch on some of the negatives because there are a couple. That section where you are dealing with armed, basically soldiers, is not that enjoyable. I think it kind of becomes so shooter heavy that it's like, whoa, there's this epic last stand against a bunch of guys, and I would have rather seen one of two things. Here are my brainstorming ideas that I came up with for the end of the game. One, you could have had Infected overwhelm the hospital, and Joel have to fight his way out to save all the Fireflies, and then they could have had their little ordeal afterwards. Or what I thought would have been kind of cool is, say something happens at the hospital, or they can't operate there, so they steal Ellie, right? And then Joel has to go in more of an open environment and take down the Fireflies and try to find who is holding her, where she's being held, and then he could run in on the doctors in the operating room. That was a really cool moment as well. I felt so much aggression, probably maybe the best example of tonal conveyance through mechanics was like shooting the head doctor and then aggressively like pushing the other two docs against the wall and being like, don't move a muscle. I really got into character there, and it was like totally unplanned, totally natural, but man, that was an intense moment. Some other things I didn't really like about the game, and just the AI is a little bit clumsy. Ellie and Tess and whoever else can never cause an alert. So they'll be running right next to a clicker at times and bump into their leg and nothing happens as long as you yourself don't scrape against them. And that's a little bit tricky. I don't know. I mean, I guess I like the fact that they come with you through the environments rather than like, you guys stay over there, and then they're always a room behind. That would kind of get a little confusing as well. But there were just a few little technical issues with the AI's behavior. I thought the enemy AI was really good. I love the clickers. I love the infected. Even some of the soldier movements and the ways that they would investigate, they weren't on specific path lines. They seemed to be very responsive and reactive to your missed arrows or to your thrown bottles or thrown bricks. And so I really did appreciate that. The other thing that kind of stood out as a weakness to me was I really didn't like when they would do those transitional cutscenes, fade to black, and then appear somewhere else. I know that it would have been very hard to get them all the way across the country in real time, in gameplay, time, but it kind of takes me out of character when all of a sudden they are somewhere else. Like the biggest one for me was in Boston. They kept constantly being like, there's the capital, there's the capital, there's the capital, and all of a sudden I jump like 5 miles and I'm right at the Capitol door. Maybe it was a mile, I don't know, but it jumped a big distance and we're right there. And it didn't bother me as much when Joel was driving Ellie, because it's like, okay, we don't want to drive for the next 2 hours or 5 hours or 10 hours. But when it was, hey, there's a visible landmark, let's get to it. Those are such cool moments. I referenced in the series, Alan Wake would do that. Like, hey, get to this gas station. I love when you can see a location in the distance and then you can get there the entire way. And so they teased it. They're like, hey, there's the Capitol building. Hey, there's the Capitol building. Hey, there's the bridge. Hey, there's the bridge. And then they cover the ground themselves. That was a little disappointing. And the last thing I'll say about the game was two, really, kind of in the same vein. One, there wasn't really a NPC that I felt I really stood out to me, and perhaps that's for the better, so then Ellie and Joel become your favorites. But Tess was disposed of rather quickly, I felt. Maybe it was the marketing that made her seem like a bigger character and having a bigger role than she did, but really she didn't. Bill was kind of okay. Frank and Sam, or Henry and Sam. Why I keep saying Frank? They're okay. David, he's okay, but none of them were really like, wow, that character is so awesome. And I would have loved to have an NPC that could have been like, hey, that sort of real favorite side character that we'd all know and love. And instead it boiled down to just Ellie and Joel, which is awesome. Ellie's one of my favorite game characters ever. And I think that you fall in love more with her than you do Joel, just because of her need to be protected. And that's something I want to touch on maybe in a later video, is how they establish that sense of responsibility and vulnerability with her, while not making her just so weak that all you do is like care over her every need and then take an easy route out. They made her strong and also made you feel for her, which is a real hard to balance to strike. So maybe we'll talk about like Elizabeth, Ellie, and Clementine in a future video. But the last thing I was going to say is the fact that the story is a little bit slow to grab you. The opener is great, but then you have about a 2 to 3 hour period, and it's sort of this awkward phase where I didn't know. I was talking to some of my friends outside of YouTube and just saying, I don't know that this game can top BioShock for me, because I love that story so much from start to finish. And here I had no attachment. When Joel's first meeting Ellie, it's a little bit awkward, and there's not really a whole lot going on, and you're kind of just plodding through some of these areas, and then it all comes together. And maybe that's for the better, because then when it does come together, the strength of that moment is that much more noticeable and that much more cool in your mind. But it does have a kind of an awkward, after the first half hour, there's sort of like half hour through hour 3 or 4 where it's a little bit like, what is going on? Is this really going to amount to anything? Not from a gameplay perspective, but just story. Because again, the plot of we got to get across country to save this girl and possibly save the world, that's not so ingenious. It's more of the moment-to-moment things that happen along the way that really drive this experience home for me. And so where does it stand? How can we assess this, or how can I rank it amongst my favorite games of all time? And I think that, over time that becomes easier. If you are away from a game for a few weeks or a month, sometimes you have different feelings or thoughts. Of course, there's a huge natural high once you finish a title that you're like, God, this is so good. But I have had a couple days. And so I will say that I think as of right now, it is probably my favorite game of all time. And that might change in a couple of months. When we get to Game of the Year, that might have evolved in a different way. But right now, it is. And I think even though BioShock is like just my cup of tea, everything I like about a game is in BioShock Infinite. That is like crazy, mysterious story, real cool upgrades and fun combat, an awesome NPC that follows you around, which, by the way, is becoming such a cool trend, and I hope that it continues in a very good fashion and evolves beyond that. I don't know where it goes from here, but companion character, like, big thumbs up. That really enhances the story and experience, especially if they're as well developed as like Elizabeth or Ellie. But what kind of takes this one over the edge for me is, one, the emotional connection. BioShock was definitely an emotional game at moments, but I don't know if it's the realism of The Last of Us, if it's the father-daughter type relationship, or if it's just the fact that they, again, convey so much through gameplay and through the storytelling itself to make you really like sigh and get chills. And my favorite moment of the game, I didn't even talk about this, the giraffes. That moment sums up the game so beautifully. It's the one moment of relief in the entire story, and so it's that much more powerful. There's no happiness really in that entire world. The joy has been sucked out. Ellie will try to bring it back in, and Joel's usually like, shut up and focus. Everybody you meet is angry, pissed off, or just tired. And so giraffes in the city walking through the grass, she's so ecstatic, and Joel's like, yeah, that's really cool. And I got chills. I teared up. You can say that's wimpy or weird or whatever, but no, like it really hits you as a moment that you're invested in these characters, you're invested in this game, you're invested in the story and what's going on, and then bam, they deliver finally that moment of reprieve, that moment of like, okay, everything can just freeze for 30 seconds and we can forget about the world and just smile and just be and just live. And I thought that was a beautiful, beautiful moment. But yeah, it stands out right now as a little bit better than BioShock. Not because the story is better. In fact, the story to me was much more interesting in BioShock Infinite. But I feel like the gameplay here, every single encounter was fun to me. Except the last one a little bit. But again, there's going to be faults in everything. 10 out of 10 doesn't mean 100% perfect. 10 out of 10 just means exceedingly awesome and memorable. And while BioShock Infinite was a 10 out of 10, Last of Us is a 10 out of 10 as well. And just delivered for me. I think that the importance of the encounters and that late game character switch really just turned it over the edge for me. I was telling everybody, my family and some other commentators on YouTube, that nope, it's not topping it. Nope, it's not topping it. BioShock is standing in pole position right now. And then they had that character switch, and I just really realized like how far this journey has come, and some of those moments, even the quick time events where you're mashing buttons to try to save these guys' lives, like, dang, they really hooked me. They really got me in a place where I can't let these guys die. I can't let them go. I can't not see what happens at the end. And then it was over. And it seemed like a game that could have gone on forever because you're just on this journey going and going and going. There was no epic final, huge, like momentous boss fight, or like, oh, we're going to Comstock's house and we know we're at the end. It was just like we got to the hospital and then you ran her out of there. And it very well could have extended on for like another 3 hours escaping their clutches. But it ended, and I thought it had a nice ending. It wasn't as shocking as something like BioShock, but it didn't do the happy thing. It wasn't like, they were partying and they had a family and he married Tess and Ellie was their daughter and it was her birthday party and he bought her a new dress. And it wasn't a Joel dies, Ellie dies. Like, they kind of, I think, surprised people a little bit in the sense that it was just like, hey, she didn't get the vaccine to save the world. She didn't die. It's just, it continues, right? Like, they live on. There's going to be struggle. There's going to be strife, but they have this connection now. And so their existence is a little bit more stable, a little bit happier, a little bit more loving, and you just wish them the best. And where does it go from here? I don't know. I'm of the mind that I would rather see New Worlds probably, but then again, I love these characters so much. If they can do it in a way that improves upon the experience without tarnishing what I've already come to appreciate and love, then go for it, right? Go for it. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. I think what I'd like to see from them, but I don't want to see just another journey across the country with Joel and Ellie to a different location. I feel like that would really harm the memory of this game in my mind if they just rinse and repeated. So it would have to be something different in a kind of a drastic fashion. But right now, it stands as probably my favorite game of all time. And maybe that's a little bit of a bandwagon-y thing to say, but I think they, this is Naughty Dog's game that comes out at the very end of a console cycle. It sort of brings together everything in terms of visuals, controls, storytelling, motion capture, everything from this generation, puts it all into one very finely tuned, very well executed package and says, enjoy. And then you just go to town for 14 hours and have a blast. And for me, it elevates above games like Heavy Rain that had a really cool cinematic story because there's actually a great game behind it. This could be a great story game with poor gameplay or a great game with a poor story. And instead, they tie the two together in a beautiful, just amazing way and therefore deliver one of the greatest video games that has ever been created, that has ever been released. And it kind of makes you sad, like, what's going to come close to this next? We had BioShock and Last of Us so close together. So, like, what will hit us in such a way again? And I don't really know what it is, but I'm excited to find out with you guys. I know that that you'll be there and I'll be there, and we'll get to have another one of these awesome discussions with it. If you want more Last of Us talk, like I said, Ellie, Elizabeth, Clementine, or my sort of predictions and ideas for where they could go if they decide to do a Last of Us 2, let me know in the comments below. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video and enjoyed the Last of Us series, one of my favorite series I've ever done, probably my favorite I've done on YouTube, and I feel like it was my sort of greatest series in terms of delivery and commentary and all that, so I was really happy with it. I was glad you guys loved it. I appreciated the support so much, and it kind of set GhostRobo back on track in a lot of ways, so thank you for being part of that and for helping me do what I love and continue to bring you guys awesome stuff in an awesome fashion, which I will continue to do so. But right now, we have to wrap this up. Thanks so much for watching. Big talk for a big game. What a journey it was. Joel and Ellie, thank you for blessing our hearts with your beautiful faces and beautiful voices and beautiful development of your bond. It's not one to soon be forgotten. Until next time, though, guys and girls, drink some hot chocolate. Don't forget about me either. I'll see you guys soon. And thanks again. Have a fantastic day, and we will see you all later. Hey guys, real quick, I have a couple more points I wanted to touch on. These videos are kind of hard to do because I never script anything on my channel, and so I'm just going with my gut and my instinct and kind of where my mind is at. And I was so enraptured in talking about The Last of Us, I forgot about a couple quick points. One, I loved how the game encouraged stealth in a very viable and important fashion. I, as many of you know, hate games that give you the option of stealth or force when force is more fun and faster. But in this game, you really couldn't do that. They required stealth and kind of gave you a story-driven reason or purpose for executing things in a quiet and calm fashion. It was part of your protection mechanism as well as a way for these characters to not have to be placed in a vulnerable situation, whether it was Tess or Henry or Ellie or whoever. The other thing I wanted to say was a quick negative. I did not like some of the areas where you could just outrun the infected. I thought that gave a little bit of an out that kind of skipped over some of the good parts of the game. Now, I necessarily didn't do that. I don't think at all, but I know that it was possible, and I did recognize the areas where you could kind of do that. As much as I like the expansive environments where you could choose how to tackle them and where to go, I liked when they at least kept the encounters in a localized, contained fashion. So the one I'm thinking of most specifically is the end encounter. There are so many infected in such a big space that you can kind of run them in circles, and I did that to a certain extent. And I think that takes away some of the fear when you can just kind of escape, when there's a wall at your back, or even in the backyards that I lauded so heavily with Bill. You know, there were fences, there were houses, there were ways that they could corner you, and also each little backyard was kind of its own separate, encounter to deal with, whereas in that open tunnel, you could kind of go any which way and free yourself of their grasp. I liked when it was contained and confined, but those are very minor negatives in otherwise a perfect game. And to wrap things up officially on a very good note, in case I didn't make it clear during the video, I do give this game a 10 out of 10. I think it's, again, shining star, beautiful game. I'm excited for the DLC. They're doing story-based DLC, which is so cool. Naughty Dog has only done multiplayer DLC in the past, and they're bringing story-based DLC this time. There's going to be, I think, 3 DLC packs or 4. One of them is story, the others are multiplayer, and they are building it from scratch. It was not cut from the initial game time. It's something that they are doing above and beyond their production of The Last of Us. So whether it involves a new character, whether it's the journey of Henry and Sam before they got to Ellie and Joel, or whether it's more with Joel or Tess or Ellie. I don't know. Tommy, who knows? But we'll find out, and that will be awesome. And of course, I'll be covering it. Thanks again for watching, guys and girls. The Last of Us. Till next time, everybody, have a fantastic day. Drink some hot chocolate. We will see you all later.